So what I will present is, of course, also joint work with people working in the project. Bart, Capio, Nabil, and Toon. And it's always the opportunity to say, well, if there are questions, I will direct them to, certainly to Toon for the microdata, to Nabil for all technicalities about the national accounts, and to Bart for everything, for the conceptual problems. So what I present is the first attempt in our project to construct distributional national accounts. I will answer the question why we want to do that, which is in fact linking with Koen's presentation. Then I will briefly explain how we do it. So what are DINAs and how do we construct DINAs? But the major part should be this one. The first results, which might answer some of the questions that I have heard. Also the remark of Koen Caminada in the back of the room who speaks this afternoon, which also reminds me, welcome Antoine, so the second speaker from PSE has also arrived, the second speaker for this afternoon. So I will then briefly browse through the first results of these DINAs, which, as always, but with all academic work and certainly empirical work, are preliminary, but at least they show us, I think, something additional and valuable compared to what Koen already presented. So first, why do we want to construct distributional national accounts? The novelty there is not in the distributional analysis, because that's what Koen has shown. Well, there is quite a bit of expertise in distributional analysis based on the survey data. The novelty there is on combining the D with the national accounts. And so why do we do that? Because what you can take out of the review paper and the presentation of Koen is that, in fact, most statements about income inequality in Belgium and in many other countries are based on disposable income. There are attempts to go a bit backwards up to gross income or market income, but more limited than disposable income or net taxable income. Koen has clearly exposed pros and cons of using these data sets. A survey, of course, in principle includes all income sources, whether they are well reported or registered, that's another thing, but it differs with tax admin data, where by definition it's determined by the legislation, the tax legislation. If child allowances are not taxed, or if capital income is not taxed in the personal income tax system, it's not in the forms anymore because it's a liberating withholding tax. So you have many, many more holes here in the tax admin data. On the other hand, you have less problems, certainly with unit non-response, at least recently. Koen has pointed to the fact that this was a big problem in the tax admin data in earlier times. And you also have no item non-response in the tax data, at least for the things which are legally obliged to fill in the form, and if there would be no fraud or shadow economy and so on. So that means, in fact, they both have pros, they both have cons. So neither survey nor tax data alone, or tax data I use here interchangeable with other admin data also, can resolve the main shortcomings. And that's when the idea, which is now I think at least maybe 15, 20 years old and coming, and he has already been referred many times now, originally in fact from Tony Atkinson himself, that is, well, let's start with two reference points which are much more consistent over time across countries. That is, because Koen has illustrated, disposable income is of course different from market income, and you define it differently than in the different services. Well, let's try to pin down a reference income from which we start and which we try to keep as comprehensive as possible in the economy and as consistent as possible. So that's the first point, pinning down the reference income. I will speak much less about the reference population, although Karel has already mentioned that it might also be important to keep an eye on who do we include. Well, the reference population will be in the DINA analysis, in principle, all people living in Belgium. But first, the reference income. Well, the proposal of DINAs is We don't start from survey information here. We start from national accounts. Well, let's take an income concept from the national accounts. People have worked for decades on harmonizing the definitions in the national accounts, on standardizing, and on agreeing what to include, what not, since end of the 30s. Well, in fact, since the end of the beginning of the 50s then, and in Belgium, 1953. So we have a very good concept of national income in different flavors in the national accounts, which is comparable across countries and also consistent over longer time periods. By the way, another advantage, certainly for the public debate, is if you speak about growth, in fact, there is only one number which comes in the newspapers, that's growth of GDP. Mostly real GDP, but at least it's growth of gross domestic product, of the total pie produced as value added in the economy. And using this as an income concept links it also more easily with the reference to that concept of growth. So about the reference population, I will say nothing. I will come back to the national income definition, precisely what we mean with that in a moment. Then. But of course, this is the pie. The national income is the pie to be distributed. That doesn't give any distributional information, of course, in national accounts. You only have institutional sectors and the total economy, but you don't have distributional information. So the whole idea was, let's try not to start from the distributional information in surveys and stop it there, but let's start from the aggregate and feed in the national accounts or enrich the national accounts with distributional information coming from other sources. What I will present as results is mainly coming from EU Silk and ECHP, but we could as well show results, and I will skip them for the sake of time, but we have already done something with the Household Finance and Consumption Survey of the ECB. You could also use budget surveys, the labor force survey, and so on, or also the admin tax data, social security register of the Crossroad Bank, and so on. So what you do is you feed in the distributional information in the national account concepts to show how relevant it is to work with the broader aggregate. I show simply here the growth rates, but expressed in terms of an index number starting in 1995. We start our analysis with 1995 because the standardized national accounts with the standard ESA 2010 goes back only to 1995. We could go back further by doing some additional operations of harmonization, but at least this is what is readily available. This is the growth of GDP expressed in index form, with, of course, and I stop in 2019, so you have, of course, a bigger downward movement there in 2020 with Corona, but this is, of course, the financial crisis. What I want to show you is that net national income, the concept on which we base our distributional analysis, evolves differently from GDP. The reason is, and here is what you mostly are taught in the national accounts part of the introductory course in economics, that is that net national income has three different letters in the acronym. It's net and not gross because we diminish it with depreciation, we subtract depreciation. It's national and not domestic because we take into account also foreign income, net foreign income, income coming from abroad, income going to abroad, and it's income and not product. That depends on where you look in the national accounts, at which account you retrieve your information. So this is GDP. What you see is that depreciation is increasing, and that's called, with the technical name in the national accounts, the consumption of fixed capital for the whole economy, is increasing faster than GDP, which of course, together with net foreign income, which I will not illustrate now, it's more volatile than the two other ones, but which produces, or which leads to the fact that net national income, the pie that we want to look the distribution of, is growing slower than GDP. More important still to connect with the picture that Koen has sketched, and on which Bram preliminarily based his conclusion, that is that disposable income, which is the crucial concept disposable income of households. And in the national accounts, households are recorded in the institutional sector 14. So what I took here as growth lines, so the orange growth line here, is the net disposable income of the sector S14, only the households. And what you see is that this is, of course, below net national income, because other parts of income are not in the households, and the households have paid taxes already, also got benefits. It's a disposable income concept in the secondary distribution of income account, but that is much lower than the net national income, and a fortiori than GDP. By the way, there is also an adjusted net disposable income in the national accounts, which again brings back into the picture the fact that you pay taxes for collective consumption and for the public goods provision and so on. So that's the dotted line here, which of course again comes closer, but is still a bit below the blue line. And the blue line is what we distribute in our distributional national account analysis. To give you a flavor of the amount about what we are speaking, this is the depreciation, that's for 2019. So GDP is diminished with 84 billions, and these are the growth rates. So net national income over the whole period is growing at a lower rate, which is quite substantially lower. So over the whole period of 25 or 30 years, this makes quite a bit of a difference. But then this is disposable income. What we are distributing, looking at net national income, is nearly 120 billion euros larger than what we are looking at if we only look at disposable income. Of course, you can also look in the surveys at gross incomes or market incomes and so on, but in principle, most of the discussions are based on disposable incomes. So it's this gap that we are closing in our distributional analysis, which is an important one, of course. And I will show you some of the numbers of what is entering there in the next slide. By the way, if I compare that with the two data sets that we will use for the distributional analysis, this is the ECHP disposable income, and this is the silk disposable income. So aggregated at the population level in 2019, we fall short there with 40 billion, and this is the growth rate. So you have a growth rate which is higher in silk over the same period, 05-18, than in the disposable income series of the national accounts, but it's 40 billions lower. So what we do, that's to remember, or to be remembered if I show you the results, what we do is we distribute the blue line over households, or in fact over individuals in the population. Yeah? Well, we also do. You will see disposable income. We will also... There is an obvious, the question is, so there are two differences. So it's disposable, that means after you paid your taxes, and it's only households here. S14 is only households. There is a lot of income, there were some questions raised, there is a lot of income which does not enter. I will show you in the table next, so the undistributed profits, for instance, which stay in the firm. And so, in principle, you make the decision, let's try to think about the whole pie which is distributed, but I will show you also a disposable income concept that we derive from our DINA analysis. So we will also have a view on disposable income inequality based on the national account distribution, but applying the DINA methodology. Yeah, everything is in there. Well, we don't question the standard of the national accounts. So, yeah, that's in fact what is available to be handed out to the residents in Belgium. Yeah, it's the national one, it's not the domestic one, because some things which are produced here, or the value added created here, goes abroad because the proprietors are living abroad, or the reverse, we also earn income from abroad. That's all taken up in the NNI concept, the national income. So it's much broader as a focus than only the households, and certainly than disposable income. So here you see some of these elements. This is net national income in 2018. I guess our GDP was then around, it's before the crisis, 450 or 460 billions. Of course, it's dominated by the compensation of employees, 233 billion. But you see here the important parts that we also will distribute, which you mostly don't, certainly the undistributed profits, so the retained earnings in the companies are 40 billions. You never will find that back in the surveys, because the survey doesn't ask for that. The dividends received by households, 16 billions. Yes, you might find them, or in principle, they are questioned also in the surveys. The question is how good do respondents answer to that? So what the point of this table is to get an idea, these are important amounts. And the anchor point is also always we distribute this. So we don't start from the bottom up, but we distribute the whole pie. So we distributed 378 billion in 2018. By the way, these different components of, yeah, Frederik? Yeah. Yes. Yes. I will come to the rules, how we distribute the different components. Yeah, but yes, we distribute everything, but of course we don't look at the investment side. So you have the three sides in the national accounts. So government investment is the expenditure side. We look at the income side. So an income for the government, of course these investments are paid based on revenues for the government, but there you don't register income in that government activity. So we look at the income side of the national accounts, not at the expenditure side. So not at the C plus I plus G plus E minus Z. We look at the income side, but it's the same concept, except that it's net, it's national, and it's income. And that's why it's not GDP, the three differences. But yes, we take up everything. But the allocation rules I will show you. They are very crude for government collective consumption. So here, by the way, very quickly, I show that the different part, or some of the parts, because the previous table also did not add up to net national income, because that's a much more involved and lengthy table. But here you see that some of the parts over the period under consideration evolve quite differently. It's again an index number starting 1995 at 100. This is net national income. This is the compensation of employees. Note that this is not a labor share. There are as many definitions of labor shares as statistics that you can find. So this is not the labor share. This is simply the compensation of employees, including everything, also the social security contributions. But it's remarkable. So compensation of employees grows faster, slightly faster, than net national income. But I want to confront it with other parts. So these are the rents, the imputed rents for homeowners, and also the actual rents of homeowners who rent out their property, but also the imputed one for self-occupied dwellings. You see here, and that surprises me a little bit, that the imputed rents, so the income component of households consisting of income from ownership and renting out property, is growing slower than net national income. We will distribute that. That's certainly something which is badly reported also in the surveys and certainly in the tax data, where you have the cadastral income, which has not been changed systematically since 40 years, but it's growing slower than net national income. And then you have the two famous ones of financial wealth income, financial capital income. These are the rents, so the fixed income securities, the rents received by households, which are, not astonishingly, growing much, much slower than NNI. It's not shares here, it's an index to summarize growth rates. So they are growing much slower, of course, due to the fall, the systematic fall up to the end of the period here of the interest rate. And these are the dividends, which are growing faster than net national income. And then you have the undistributed profits, that 40 billion in 2018 that we will also distribute. Well, it's difficult, it's quite volatile, not surprisingly. It's difficult to say whether it systematically grows faster than NNI, but certainly the last period, which will be an important one for our results, you see here that there is a fast increase in the undistributed profits. So that about the underlying parts of net national income. I repeat, we distribute the whole pie net national income. In the perspective of DINAs, and Antoine is here, from PSE, we follow more or less the guidelines of the leading institute there, one of the two leading institutes, because the OECD is also producing DINAs in the same spirit, but with slightly different conventions. But so in the spirit of WID, you have 4 perspectives to look at that net national income. And one of them comes back to the point raised by Koen Caminada in the back there. So the first one is that you look at pre-tax factor income. The pre-tax factor income, so that's the code in national accounts, and B5N is net national income across the whole economy, over all the institutional sectors, so firms, government, and households, and also the small companies serving households. So this is net national income, and you can look at it from a production perspective, creating the value added and distributing it over labor and capital. So that's what is called pre-tax factor income. In that concept, pensioners don't get anything because they don't work. So that's not exactly market income as Koen referred to it, because there you don't add the social security contributions for the, paid by the employer. In the DINAs, this is including the social security contributions, everything. And that's the difference with the second concept, in fact one to which Koen was referring, that's pre-tax, post-replacement income. For those who struggle to remember the different concepts, we were so, well, not fed up, but there was such a speech confusion among the collaborators in the project that at some point in time, Antoine, we have decided we call this DINA 1, DINA 2, DINA 3, and DINA 4, because we can't remember the different, or the terminology of the 4 different concepts. I presume that many other people working in the DINAs have the same problem, like pre-tax post-replacement income. Of course, if you think about it, it's logical, but it's difficult to remember what is in it. So what you do in the pre-tax post-replacement income, that is, you start from the total income created in the economy, but you take a different view at replacement income. So the replacement incomes here for pensioners and unemployment benefits, which are certainly replacing labor income if you don't work anymore, are added, and you subtract the social insurance contributions. You could do it quite complex by only subtracting the social security contributions paid for pensions and unemployment benefits. That's not what we do. We subtract all social insurance contributions and we add in here only the benefits, pensions, and employment. That's what we call DINA 2. I will not focus too much on DINA 2 in the results today, to be able to present mainly 1 and 3. 3 is then, so DINA 3 is that concept here, but then you still pay taxes on income, the income taxes, and you add in the benefits like social assistance, family benefits, which are not related to lost labor income. I will mainly present DINA 1 results and DINA 3 results. So try to remember, because I will not use these terms anymore. But DINA 3 is the concept which is not exactly equal, but which comes close to the concept that Koen has shown, disposable income of households. Because we look at individuals in the end, and we have a disposable income concept in the sense that we add all benefits, pensions and employment benefits have already been added, also the other benefits, and we subtract all taxes, social insurance contributions and taxes on income. Yeah? We look at individuals. But I have a slide on how we structure the population. Next, for the reference population, I will show you, but we look at individuals. We distribute everything over individuals, and I will show you briefly the rules on that. But individuals living in households, of course. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but we split them. Yeah, yeah. Chef? Okay, that's DINA 4. That's DINA 4. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes, sorry. I should take over the terminology. But then people don't dare to ask questions anymore because they have to be valued good or excellent. So I've stressed that we always distribute the whole pie, the net national income. The exception is here, post-tax disposable income, of course, because the taxes go to the government and they don't come back at this stage. So this is the concept. Disposable income is, of course, smaller. The total pie here that we distribute is smaller than the net national income. This is net national income. This is net national income from another perspective. This is no longer net national income because we don't consider there what's done with the taxes. And that's what Jeff is asking. Well, that's what is called, and maybe that's the most difficult one to remember, post-tax national income. We are back at national income, and it's post-tax. So here we add all social benefits in kind, education, but also the other government expenditures like buying, but that's an expenditure view, buying the F-35 fighters, the collective consumption, and also the government surplus or the government deficit, because it has to add up to net national income. So that's what you meant, Jeff? So that's the vision here, DINA 4. The reference population is all individuals living in Belgium. And as you will see, in fact, the backbone of our distributional analysis are the surveys described by Koen. So we take there for granted that the SILC and the ECHP over which we will spread out that net national income is representative for the population living in Belgium. We know that there are some specificity there, that some households are not in the data set and so on. But so we consider this population, but I think that's the question which was raised there. Some income is of course joint and another is individually to be identified individually, like earnings, and partly as joint, for instance, imputed rents if you live in a couple. So what we do is we have several scenarios also taken from the WID. WID is the World Income Database at PSE in Paris, which have written these guidelines for the DINA work. So we identify there 4 scenarios. For instance, the first scenario is that you keep the whole population, so all children included, and you don't split the personal income, like earnings, you don't split it, you keep it individual, you assign it to the individual who is earning it, and the joint income, you split it equally. That's one possible scenario. In that case, you have, of course, all the people up to 20 years who mostly don't work with very low incomes, because the only thing that you split then over these members of the household is the joint income and not the individual earnings. So that's not a scenario that I will mostly use here in this presentation. The second scenario, 2, 3, and 4 all take the same decision here. We only look at the subpopulation of at least 20 years old. That's an arbitrary demarcation line. Previously it was 16 years old, now it's 20 years old. We could also, of course, also look at the suggestion of Karel to look at between 20 and 64 or 65 over the whole period. But this is in fact what we now use. And then we still have the choice to make about individual incomes and joint incomes. The scenario that we will use, or that I will use to show you the results, because I cannot show all of the scenarios, is we keep individual income individually, so we assign them to the individuals as they have earned them individually, but the joint income of the household is equally split over the members of the household, but only over the members in the population here, over the members older than 20-year-old. So if I show you distributional figures, it's mostly for this scenario, except once when I compare with the survey results. Yeah. You could. You could, and I will show you one result at the household level too. You could, of course, put all resources together in the household, apply the equivalent scale, or do an intra-household allocation rule. You could, yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Is scenario 2 the standard, Antoine? There are no real standards, so... yeah, no. Yeah. Yes, yeah. In scenario 4 not, I will show you one result for, here you have what is called a narrow equal split, where you share the earnings from spouses, both active in the labor market in that case, or one active and not. You split it equally among the spouses. Of course, that will influence the picture that you get out at the level of the individuals. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so there is no prior, I think it depends on the question that you want to answer. If you want to look at earnings inequality, you would leave it at the level of the individual, I think. Yeah. No, but we are not using equivalent scales here. So it's a scenario decision here that we either equally split, or that we either leave the individual incomes individually, or we share them equally. At one scenario, but it's not in the table, we have done, in fact, what Bram asks, that pooled all the household resources and applied the equivalent scale. And there we used the OECD equivalent scale. Yeah, but that's another issue. I mean, that's, you apply the equivalent scale because you pool the resources. Yeah, and mostly we don't pool the resources here in the analysis that we have done up to now. So before we can move to the results, a brief explanation about what we are in fact doing and also not doing. In fact, we do two things when we say that we do a distributional analysis on national accounts. The first thing is we rescale the survey income. So the backbone is a survey, but we rescale the survey incomes item per item such that the population total, we have weights in the survey. Each household responding to the survey represents so many households, that this weighted aggregate equals the national account aggregate. And I fool you a little bit here by showing you the most evident one. In the appendix of the table and also in the slides that we will put online, you see these tables in extenso for all national accounts aggregates, how we link them with, if possible, with which item in the survey we linked it. For those working with Silk, you might recognize here the codes of Silk. So this is, of course, and that's why I say I'm fooling you a little bit about how easy it is. This is wages and salaries in the national accounts. That's code D11 in the sector S14 side of the resources. Well, we link that with the variables in the survey, gross cash and near cash employee income, gross non-cash employee income, with these two survey variables. And we do that for all items of net national income that we want to distribute. So in fact, what we are doing, we simply rescale, so S stands for survey and I for the observation in the survey of a respondent. So what we do is, this is the total income in the national accounts for that specific item, like wages and salaries. If we look at the survey, we only have, let's say that this is 200 billion, we only find 150 billion. What we do is, for that specific income item S from the total pie, we scale it up individually, yeah? at the level of the register or the observation in the survey, we rescale it such that we get, if we apply the weights in the survey, we get the national account total. So in fact, it's nothing else than what we're doing is distributing the national account total, in this case, according to the survey distributional info. So we are in fact inserting the distributional info from the surveys that Koen has described into the national accounts. This is not possible for all national account items. The fighters are not in the income list because it's an expenditure item, but other ones, undistributed profits, you will not find a code in Silk for the undistributed profits. So we had to make some decisions, and these are provisional. We hope to refine them in the coming weeks. Even corporate income taxes, at the level of DINA 1, you have the corporate income taxes included also, the taxes and the subsidies on the products, the public expenditures, all have to be linked to something. And I've listed here some of the assumptions. Either we assume that's equally distributed among the population. I have no other reason for, if it would be in the income list, for the or for the public defense parts, that you would distribute it equally among the population. Or, like for the undistributed profits, at this point in our research and in the results that I will show, we follow the distribution of another aggregate which we think is as close as possible. Like in this case, for the undistributed profits, we distributed them based on what we observe in the survey for each household as dividends received in the household. Evidently, that's a proxy, but we try to make the best of it. So either you don't include it at all, and then you get the pictures of Koen, and then you get the remark of non-included income, or you include it and you try to distribute it as good as possible. And that's exactly also the philosophy which is followed by Thomas Piketty in Paris and the whole team there. Or we sometimes also keep it neutral. With neutral, we mean we distribute it according to the income concept, DINA 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on which analysis we are doing, such that it does not change the picture of the distribution. I will not list all the different decisions that we take for all parts of net national income, but you can find them in the appendix. I will switch now to the results, because otherwise I only have explained what DINAs are. And let me now show the results. So for the taxes I've skipped, you can raise questions if you want. So first let me explain the difference, the major difference that I have already announced between a DINA analysis and the survey analysis is the fact that we exclude that part of income that we don't observe in the survey of households, and that's capital income. What I show here is for several points in the distribution, but mainly here for the population. And the population is here scenario 2. So I will mostly show scenario 2. That means we restrict the population from 20 up to, so the total population above 20, but for this specific graph, we even restricted it, but that's only for this graph, Carol, from 20 to 64, under the no split of individual income. So what I show here is the share of capital income in the total income DINA 1. That means the pre-tax income concept. DINA 1 is pre-tax. Well, this is the share of capital income, that's the share of labor income, 84, not visible, I think, from on the chairs there, and 8.2, but what I want to show is we double the share of capital. And of course, this is very dependent on the point in the distribution. If I show you now the top 1%, that's what you get as capital income in the total pre-tax income of the top 1%. Top 1% defined over the DINA 1 concept, so the top 1% of the pre-tax income concept. Now they get 62.2% of their DINA 1 consists of capital income. It's obvious that including all these forms of capital income, both real estate and financial capital income, and also financial capital income, undistributed profits, besides the dividends, the interests received, and so on, it's obvious that this makes an important difference in the distributional picture. I show it here for the other parts of the distribution. That's for the bottom, for the top decile, but without the top 1%. Also a substantial increase. It's nearly threefold here, 5.5 to 16% of their income consists of capital income, with a corresponding decrease of labor income. And that's for the bottom part of the distribution, where capital income becomes less important. By the way, that's the reason why we have excluded here the above 65, to show a stylized picture here, because certainly for the bottom 50%, it's dominated here by capital income if we include all pensioners too, because they have in DINA 1, in pre-tax income, they have no capital income, which would be different with DINA 2. Yeah. Yeah. No, no, no. Yes, yes, yes. But I will show the effect on the Gini, huh? Yeah. It's possible, yes. Yeah, yes. And we have done that with the HFCS imputation yet, but I will not show that. Yes, yes, it can even be bigger, yeah. That's based now on the survey information, huh? Yeah. But that will not change in principle, that will not change. But that the total population, here we don't distribute. Well, a little bit because we cap here on 64, but yeah. So, why is this so important to look at these shares? Yeah, good. In DINA 1, it's in the pension funds? Yes? Yeah. Sure. Yeah, but I didn't want to respond to your remark when you did it with Koen. In fact, I also wanted to raise that more conceptual thing. It is, if you start thinking about pensions, contributions for pensions, and certainly in capitalization funds, well, you need in fact another income concept than what we are used to do. You have to think about life cycle or claims over the rest of your life on incomes and so on. That's not what we have done up to now, but you're right there, yeah. Yeah. So why is this so important? And I've not shown yet the results on inequality, but Tony Shorrocks, one of these famous inequality authors of the 80s and the 90s, has given us a decomposition of the contribution of income sources, which was a difficult thing to tackle methodologically. How much a given income source, if you add up the income sources to one income for an individual or a household, how much one source contributes to inequality. What I show now is independent of the inequality measure. It has nothing to do with, do we decompose the tail measure or the Gini? It's simply how much is contributed by a part of your income in the household. What I first show is the survey result, the Shorrock's decomposition. So what I show you here is how much does capital income contribute to total inequality in all these years. You see that in the surveys, capital income, and you have the break here that Koen has highlighted all the time, that's based on the ECHP, this is silk, that capital income in the survey doesn't contribute much to inequality. And then, well, it has to sum to 100. Most of inequality, and that will be one of my conclusions, most of inequality that we see in the surveys is inequality from labor income. You don't see inequality here, but you see the contribution to the level of inequality of any inequality measure. And that's dominated by labor income. If we do that same Shorrock's decomposition for our DINA dataset, that's what you get with the same colors. The contribution of capital in total inequality is tremendously increasing. We don't find a clear pattern through time, whether it contributes more or less. It's non-monotonic, but it's clear that inequality in labor income is much, much, much less important than the inequality in capital income, contributing to total inequality. And it's more than time to move to inequality itself, and that's the answer to the question of Bram raised in Koen's presentation. That is, well, how does now our statement or conclusion about inequality, is it affected or not by working with this much larger focus on income created in the economy? This is in fact the line that you are used to now in the surveys, and I take the Gini here, the Gini of equivalized disposable income, and here we did it for the whole population because it comes from surveys and we wanted to compare it with the standard result on the OECD website and so on. So this is the declining Gini coefficient that you obtain from the surveys. This is what we obtain if we do exactly the same calculation of inequality on our DINA dataset. And because it's disposable income in the survey, I start here with DINA 3. So DINA 3 is disposable income. I will go back to DINA 1 in a moment, but this is disposable income. It's clear that first, not surprising, the level of inequality is higher, and I will compare it with other countries in a moment. The level of inequality is higher, and now we find in the last 10 years, more or less starting in 2012-13, we find an increasing trend of inequality. We are very prudent in concluding this as the definitive statement about inequality evolution in Belgium, but at least tentatively you can say that we are less confident now than on what we see in the survey information, even for the same income concept. It's disposable income here after taxes. We seem to have to conclude that we can be less confident that inequality is not changing at all in Belgium. That's what we try to express here. So here you have that increasing line. Of course, people might say, and I might skip this for the sake of time, for the people who don't know Lorentz dominance results, it might be a bit fast, but some people don't like the Gini. You have two subgroups of people working on inequality, people who are extremely fond of the Gini, and you have others who really dislike the Gini for whatever reason. So if you don't like the Gini, it's often criticized, yeah, but it's always with the same coefficient here, the Gini, you should look at other measures or adverse measures according to us, like shares and so on. Well, if you don't like the specific inequality measure, one of the contributions in measurement of inequality is exactly, we can also do an analysis which holds for a very broad class of measures. The essence of an inequality measure is that it has to register that if income goes from rich to poor, that inequality decreases. And that's what is called the Picot-Dalton principle. And second, we work with relative measures. That means that if all income positions grow at the same rate, inequality does not change. We can question that and use other measures for that. But if we accept these two things, then we can do an analysis based on the Lorenz curve. And if you find that one Lorenz curve is above the other one, then it's not only that inequality is higher or lower for the Gini, but for all possible measures. And that's what we call Lorenz dominance. And I show you now a table which initially we constructed, Koen and me, 10 years ago to compare different years on the basis of Lorenz dominance, and you can compare every year with every other year. And so what you will see in that table is the Lorenz curve of, let's say, 2013 above the one of 2008 or 11 or 15. You can compare all the years based on the configuration of the Lorenz curves. And that's a much more robust statement of inequality. And I do that here for the DINA 3 concept. So we still stay in disposable income. I come to pre-tax income in a moment. This is the result. So how do you read this table? You have all the years here and all the years here. That's because we do bilateral comparisons for all the years. Let's take the column here, 2009. A Lorenz curve which is above another one of another year in the row reads as a plus sign, it's above. And if the Lorenz curve is above, it's closer to the 45-degree line. We consider this here as better, and that's why we chose green for the color. So what you read here is that not only for the Gini, but for all possible measures satisfying the same properties, relative and the transfer principle, 2009 always has less inequality than 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you only want to look at the time pattern, you have to look at this here, each year with the preceding year. The message of this table is, and you have to study it a bit carefully, so we didn't fill in this here because we don't want to compare, because of the reasons that Koen has given, the silk years with the ECHP years. We only compare the ECHP years with the ECHP years themselves. But the message is quite clear here. Independent of the Gini, you have either green or red. 0 means you have crossing Lorenz curves. There it depends on the measure that you would take to make the statement inequality goes up or down. But at least you find for DINA 3 much more green here between 2007 up to 2013 and much more red here. That means that the statement that we think that inequality might be less pronouncedly decline or even increase since 2012-13. So here is 2014, yeah, that's 13. It's in fact since 2014, is quite robust. I now move to DINA 1, and DINA 1 is pre-tax. So there it's still much more obvious that we have a bit green here, less, but that you have a big red block here, indicating in a robust way that inequality in pre-tax income is increasing in the final part since 2013 here. Interesting to see is DINA 4, the preferred concept by Jeff there. DINA 4 is also distributing all the public expenditures. We distribute them equally, most part of it equally across the population. It's not surprising then that you find much more green in relative measures, and that's what you find here. But the message, even in DINA 4, the message, the very broad painted message is green up to here, and more red in the recent period. And that's what you will find now in all the other results, but I see that my time is up now. In all the other results that I can show you, here we now move to the very popular, a bit to our regret, income share pictures. The income shares of the top 1%, of the bottom 50%, and this is the middle of the income. Well, what I first show now is DINA 1. I asked you to remember DINA 1 and DINA 3, mainly these two. DINA 1 is pre-tax income. Here you find, in the full blue curve, you find our DINA analysis. Sorry. So I have to stop. I don't know. I never know how to stop this. So we find here indeed an increasing top 1% share if you compare it with the survey. So that's the survey. So the dotted one is the survey line here. And yeah, I have to stop it, but I'll give it to I will compare it with with other countries in a moment. That's less the case, so less sensitivity here for the top 10%, much more for the 40%, the middle 40%, the pointer is no longer working. So there we find that compared to the survey, the share of the middle income part, the middle 40% is much lower and is indeed a little bit declining in our new analysis. And this is, and there is the legend, that's the bottom 50%, so the dotted is the survey. And now you clearly see it has to come from somewhere. Here, the top 1% increasing. It comes from the bottom 50% there in DINA 1, so in pre-tax income, it's declining. And now I add the comparison with the US. Of course, it continues to hold that our top 1% in pre-tax income is lower than in the US. But it's increasing. It's also increasing for the top decile, but less pronounced. We are, and that's where we differ from the US, the middle 40 is still much higher, the share. And look at the full blue line than in the US. But surprisingly, the bottom 50% in these preliminary results show that we are much less different than we thought compared to the US. So if, at least now, so we were above, but we are approaching the line of the US. I can make the same graphs now for DINA 3, and there I compare with other countries. So I now start with the bottom 50%. So the bottom 50% for DINA 3 is the bottom 50% that Koen would show with the dotted line in the survey. The dotted line is the survey share of the bottom half of the distribution, which is much higher than what we find in France, in the Netherlands, the mauve line, and in the US. But if you look from the dotted line to the full line, the share of the bottom 50% goes down substantially and is declining. It's in disposable income now, after redistribution, because it's DINA 3, and you see that the picture is very, very different compared to what we get out of the survey. That's again the middle 40, and that's the top 1%, with again the increasing share in disposable income now of the top 1%, much higher than the dotted line of the surveys, and higher than the Netherlands and France. So our preliminary results show that for the disposable income in Belgium, we have a higher top 1% share than what we get in France and the Netherlands, lower than in the US, which is the orange line. This is the famous growth incidence curve. We can use the DINA dataset also to distribute or to compare differential growth at different points in the distribution. Milanovic has popularized that with his elephant curve. So the elephant curve simply shows you for different points in the distribution, which is the horizontal axis, how much growth was there in income, and I use here DINA 3, that means disposable income. Is income growth higher at lower parts of the distribution or higher at upper parts of the distribution? If it's higher at lower parts, you speak about equalizing growth. If it's monotonically decreasing, of course, it can also be not, the elephant curve is not monotonically increasing or decreasing. If it's lower growth at the bottom and higher growth at the top, then you have disequalizing growth. And I think this is the first result of our project, which might be interesting to compare the periods. We omitted the bottom because there it's quite unreliable, unstable. We have to work more on that, but it's also because you take percentage changes of very, very low incomes there. But you see that in the first period, I distinguished the three periods, 1995-2000, which is ECHP. We have equalizing growth. We have lower growth in the period 2003-2013 of disposable income of the individuals. But it's quite remarkable that the slope of the curve of the final period, and which confirms what we found, that the top 1% is higher and increasing, that the Gini is increasing, that in the last period, since 2013, or we took here 2013-2014, the growth at the top of the distribution is larger than at the bottom of the distribution. So you have a different slope of the famous growth incidence curve. Then the final result, or the final slide, is to compare the levels of inequality at the different DINA concepts. I've highlighted here mainly DINA 1 and DINA 3. That's the Ginis of the income concepts pre-tax and post-redistribution, including everything. So not looking at DINA 2 now. So the difference between these two is the effect on inequality of taxes and benefits. Everything, also pensions, social security contributions, we don't disentangle here with DINA 2. So if that difference between these two curves changes, that means that the redistributive system works more or less, it redistributes more or less. And it's one of the points of Bea, who is not here, Bea Cantillon. She made this point for several years now, that she said, my conjecture is that inequality in Belgium is not very much increasing in disposable income terms, but it is in market income. If that's the case, that means that the redistributive system has to work harder and harder and harder. That you can measure here by looking at how large that difference between the two curves is. That's called the Reynolds-Malinsky index. And you see indeed that if you look at the period since 2005, that's not an inequality measure, that's a difference between two inequality measures, that the tax and transfer system reduces inequality more, so has to is a normative statement that redistributes more, either because inequality in market income is higher and it wants to keep disposable income inequality unchanged, or a combination of different factors. But it's true that the tax and transfer system works harder, except for the last period where you see a declining pattern. So these are then the conclusions. The first conclusion, I've stressed what we are looking at in the first presentation with the surveys. That's inequality of earnings. It's predominantly earnings. So if you add capital income, which is not surprising, I guess, for most of the people in the audience, if you add unobserved capital income, it makes a huge difference. And capital income is the major source of pre-tax income for the top 1%. This definitely affects the distributional picture compared to the service, mainly after, I think, 2012, 2013, which might make Belgium less an exception compared to other countries. I've not done too much comparison with other countries now, but it's certainly, it's maybe less paradise than we thought. And also that the tax and transfer system has to work harder.